More than 20 years after 5 of her children disappeared, an envelope arrived at the home of Jennie Sodder. There was no return address. Inside was a photograph of an unidentified young man. Dark hair, serious eyes, a face that seemed hauntingly familiar. Jennie believed she was looking at her son, Louis. Not as the 9-year-old she remembered, but as a grown man. On the back of the photograph was a fragmented message. Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. The remaining words and numbers explained nothing. Authorities had declared that Louis and 4 of his siblings died when the Sodder family home burned on Christmas morning in 1945. But no remains were ever conclusively identified as belonging to those 5 children. And now, someone appeared to be suggesting that Louis had lived. The Sodders hired a private investigator to trace the photograph. The inquiry produced no verified identity, no confirmed location, and no explanation for who had sent the envelope. The man in the picture has never been identified. To an investigator, the photograph was unauthenticated evidence. To a mother who had never been given her child's remains, it was something much harder to dismiss. It was hope. The Sodder family lived outside Fayetteville, West Virginia. George Sodder, born Giorgio Soddu in Italy, and his wife Jennie had built a successful trucking business and raised a family of 10 children. 9 of those children were home on Christmas Eve in 1945. Their son Joe was away serving in the military. By sunrise, 5 were missing. 14-year-old Maurice, 12-year-old Martha, 9-year-old Louis, 8-year-old Jennie, and 5-year-old Betty. The official explanation was straightforward. The children had been trapped upstairs and killed in the fire. George and Jennie refused to believe it. They became convinced that the children had been taken before, or perhaps during, the destruction of the house. For decades, the case has been presented as one of America's strangest kidnapping mysteries. But before asking whether 5 children were taken, there is a more basic question. How carefully did anyone prove that they had died? George had arrived in the United States as a teenager. He eventually settled in West Virginia, where he established his trucking company and built a comfortable life for his family. By most accounts, the Sodders were hardworking, financially secure, and devoted to their children. George was also outspoken. During the Second World War, he openly criticized Benito Mussolini, the fascist dictator of his native Italy. Those opinions reportedly created tension with some members of the local Italian community. George later described a disturbing encounter with an insurance salesman. According to George, the man became angry after he refused to purchase a policy. The salesman allegedly warned that George's house would one day go up in smoke and that his children would be destroyed. George believed the threat was connected to his criticism of Mussolini. No surviving evidence directly connects that man to the fire. At the time, the words may have sounded like intimidation. After Christmas morning, they sounded like a warning. The night began like an ordinary family Christmas. The younger children were excited about their new toys. They asked Jennie if they could remain downstairs beyond their usual bedtime. She agreed, provided they completed their chores before going to sleep. George and the older boys went upstairs. Jennie remained awake for a while with 2-year-old Sylvia, the youngest child in the family. At approximately 12:30 in the morning, the telephone rang. Jennie answered. A woman asked for someone Jennie did not know. Jennie later recalled hearing laughter and the sound of glasses in the background. She told the woman she had the wrong number and hung up. The call would become one of the story's most frequently repeated mysteries. Police, however, reportedly identified the caller and concluded that she had simply dialed the wrong number. After the call, Jennie noticed something unusual. The lights downstairs were still on. The curtains had not been closed. The front door was unlocked, and the children had not completed the chores they had promised to do. Jennie assumed they had become tired and gone upstairs. She closed the house and returned to bed. Later, she heard a heavy impact on the roof. Then came the sound of something rolling. The noise stopped. Jennie fell asleep again. At approximately 1:30 a.m., she woke for a second time. This time, she smelled smoke. Fire was spreading through the lower part of the house. George and Jennie escaped with Sylvia. Their adult son John, 17-year-old Marion, and 16-year-old George Jr. also made it outside. 5 younger children were believed to be upstairs. George tried to go back for them. The interior staircase was already blocked by flames and smoke. Outside, the family encountered a series of failures that would become central to the mystery. George normally kept an extension ladder against the house. That night, it was missing. Unable to reach the upper windows, he tried to use one of his trucks as a platform. If he could position it beside the house, he might be able to climb high enough to reach the children. The engine would not start. He tried another vehicle. It also failed. These were vehicles connected to the family's trucking business. George could not understand why neither one would operate when he needed them most. The telephone was dead. Neighbors attempted to contact the local volunteer fire department, but the response system was slow and disorganized. Someone eventually had to travel into town to find help. Meanwhile, George continued trying to reach the upper floor. He broke windows and injured himself in the attempt. The rooms where his children were supposed to be were only a few yards above him, but every practical way of reaching them had failed. The structure collapsed within approximately 30 to 45 minutes. The fire station was only a few miles away. Firefighters did not arrive until around 8 in the morning. By then, the Sodder home had been reduced to a smoking basement filled with debris. The chance to rescue the children was gone. The chance to determine what happened to them was about to be mishandled. Firefighters conducted a brief search of the ruins. They found nothing that could be conclusively identified as the remains of the 5 children. That did not stop authorities from reaching an almost immediate conclusion. The children were presumed dead. The fire was attributed to faulty electrical wiring. Death certificates eventually recorded the children as having died from fire or suffocation. George questioned the electrical explanation. He maintained that some of the lights in the house continued working while the fire burned. He also said the wiring had been inspected not long before the disaster. Neither claim proves that an electrical fire was impossible. One functioning circuit would not reveal the condition of every wire in the house. But the official conclusion was never supported by the kind of forensic examination that would be expected today. The scene was not secured for a prolonged recovery. No forensic anthropologist examined the debris. The initial search lasted hours, not days. Within a short time, George used a bulldozer to fill the basement with soil. He reportedly wanted to preserve the site as a memorial to his children. Instead, the decision permanently mixed the original fire debris with outside material. A reliable forensic examination was becoming impossible. And around the ruined house, the family began finding signs that the disaster may not have been a simple accident. A telephone repairman examined the line and reportedly concluded that it had been physically cut. The missing ladder was later discovered away from its usual location, reportedly down an embankment. A man was eventually accused of stealing a block and tackle from the property. He admitted cutting a line during the theft, claiming that he believed it was an electrical wire. He denied starting the fire. His admission could explain the dead telephone. It did not explain why the ladder had been moved, or why the family's vehicles failed during the rescue. Then there was the sound on the roof. Months after the fire, the family discovered a dark green rubber-like object on the property. George believed it might have been some kind of incendiary device. Over time, the object became known in retellings as a napalm pineapple bomb. That description has never been verified. No surviving forensic examination identifies the object as a bomb. And during the Second World War, the familiar pineapple designation normally referred to the Mark II fragmentation grenade, not a napalm incendiary weapon. The object may have been connected to the sound Jennie heard. It may also have been unrelated debris. Like so much potential evidence in the case, it was discovered too late and documented too poorly to provide a reliable answer. The reported threat, cut telephone line, missing ladder, and failed vehicles all justified suspicion, but none of them proved that the children had been removed from the house. No reliable witness saw anyone carry them away. No confirmed vehicle was observed transporting them. And one early statement suggested that at least some of the children were still upstairs after the fire began. John Sodder was one of the older children who escaped. According to a later examination of the police records, John initially said that he went upstairs and physically tried to wake his younger siblings. If that statement was accurate, its significance is enormous. It would mean that at least some of the missing children were inside the house while the fire was burning. That would severely weaken the theory that all 5 had been kidnapped before the fire. The family later offered another explanation. They believed John was suffering from survivor's guilt, that he described what he wished he had done rather than what actually happened. There is no surviving evidence capable of resolving the conflict. John's first account cannot be ignored, but it should not be used to condemn a traumatized survivor whose family had just been destroyed. It does expose a central weakness in the kidnapping theory. Even if John's statement was inaccurate, there was still no reliable witness who saw the 5 children leave the house. The case must therefore be divided into 3 separate questions. Were the children inside? Was the fire accidental or deliberate? And did the failed recovery operation destroy the evidence needed to answer either question? One of the Sodders' strongest arguments concerned the absence of recognizable remains. The family could not understand how 5 bodies could disappear inside a house that seemed to collapse so quickly. But the actual fire conditions were more complicated. The structure may have collapsed within approximately 45 minutes, but the debris continued burning and smoldering through the night. Reports indicate that large gasoline drums and other combustible materials were present in or near the lower areas of the property. Those materials could have intensified the heat. When the house collapsed, burning material collected inside the basement. Soil later placed over the ruins may have helped retain heat around the debris. Human bone does not simply vanish in an ordinary house fire, but intense heat can cause bone to shrink, crack, become brittle, and break into small fragments. Those fragments may resemble plaster, stone, or burned construction material. A modern recovery of fire victims can require trained teams to examine debris carefully for days or even weeks. The Sodder scene received nothing close to that level of attention. It is reasonable to believe that some skeletal material should have survived. It is also reasonable to believe that searchers in 1945 could have overlooked, discarded, or misidentified it. The absence of conclusively identified remains demonstrates that the recovery operation was inadequate. It does not, by itself, demonstrate that the children survived. The family's trust in the investigation deteriorated further when Fire Chief F.J. Maurice reportedly said that something resembling a human heart had been discovered in the ruins. Rather than preserving it as evidence, Maurice said it had been buried at the site. The family later recovered a small container from the location he identified. A pathologist reportedly determined that the material inside was not a human heart. It was beef liver. It also appeared not to have been exposed to the fire. Why the liver was placed there has never been conclusively established. It may have been an attempt to give the family something to bury. It may have been intended to end their questions, or parts of the story may have become distorted as it passed between witnesses. Whatever the explanation, the incident gave George and Jennie another reason to distrust the official account. Then, in 1949, they arranged a new excavation. This time, human bones were found. 4 lumbar vertebrae were recovered from the site and sent to experts at the Smithsonian Institution. The examination determined that the bones came from one person, most likely between approximately 16 and 22 years old. A younger age was possible, but considered less likely. The bones showed no clear exposure to fire. Maurice, the oldest missing child, had been 14. The analysis suggested that the vertebrae may have arrived with the soil used to fill the basement after the fire. That soil reportedly came from an area near a cemetery. The discovery could not be connected to any of the missing children. 4 years after the fire, George and Jennie finally had human bones from the property. They still did not have evidence that those bones belonged to their family. George and Jennie refused to let the case disappear. They wrote to public officials and law enforcement agencies. In 1947, George contacted FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Hoover replied that the FBI could potentially assist if the investigation fell within federal authority, or if local officials formally requested the Bureau's involvement. No request produced a full FBI investigation. The letter did not establish that a kidnapping had occurred, but for the Sodders, it meant that another possible path had closed without answering their questions. They hired private investigators. They contacted newspapers. They followed reports from people who claimed to have seen the children in other cities and states. One woman came forward years later and said she had seen several of the children at a hotel shortly after the fire, but she had not known them beforehand. Her identification relied on photographs she saw later, and no independent evidence confirmed her account. Other sightings produced the same result: no verified identity, no reliable paper trail, no physical evidence. The family erected a large billboard beside the highway. It displayed photographs of the 5 children and offered a reward for information. For decades, passing drivers saw their faces. The billboard kept the search alive. It also attracted fraudsters, clairvoyants, and strangers claiming to be missing relatives. George followed leads across the country, sometimes despite his declining health. Each time, he returned without the children. Then, more than 2 decades after the fire, the anonymous photograph arrived. The unidentified man appeared to share several features with Louis. The eyes looked similar. So did the shape of the nose and eyebrows. But resemblance is not identification. The photograph had no verified date, location, or chain of custody. The writing on the back was never authenticated. No one established whether the sender had known Louis, belonged to the family, or was exploiting the Sodders' grief. The family hired an investigator to pursue the photograph. The inquiry produced no verified answer. Later retellings sometimes claim that the investigator mysteriously disappeared. The available evidence supports a more limited conclusion. The family never received a useful report identifying the man. For Jennie, that absence of an explanation preserved the possibility that Louis had survived. And if Louis had survived, perhaps the others had as well. Perhaps they had been threatened. Perhaps they were raised under different names. Perhaps someone prevented them from returning home. But each possibility required another assumption. None produced testable evidence. George died in 1969 without learning what happened to his 5 children. Jennie continued wearing black and searching for answers until her death in 1989. She never accepted that the fire had taken them. The failures of the original investigation make certainty impossible. But the available evidence does not support every theory equally. The most probable explanation is that the 5 children remained inside the house and died from smoke inhalation, fire, structural collapse, or some combination of the 3. Their remains may have been fragmented, overlooked, mishandled, or permanently mixed with debris and outside soil. That conclusion does not mean the official investigation was competent. It was not. And it does not prove that the official electrical explanation was correct. The fire may have been accidental. It is also possible that it was deliberately set. The reported threat, severed telephone line, displaced ladder, and other unusual circumstances make arson a legitimate possibility. But no surviving physical evidence identifies an incendiary device or a person responsible for starting the fire. A coordinated kidnapping is the least supported explanation. It would require 5 children to be removed without a reliable witness, transported without leaving a confirmed trail, and prevented from making verifiable contact with their family for the rest of their lives. That scenario cannot be ruled out with absolute certainty, but no authenticated photograph, document, fingerprint, DNA result, or confirmed adult identity has ever demonstrated that one of the 5 survived. George and Jennie were asked to accept 5 deaths without a reliable recovery, without 5 identified bodies, and without an investigation they could trust. Their refusal to stop searching does not prove that the children escaped. It proves that their parents were never given enough evidence to let them go. Decades later, their granddaughter described the family's search as more than a mystery. It was a love story. For years, the roadside billboard kept Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty visible to the world. It was an appeal for information, but it was also a declaration from 2 parents who believed that somewhere, somehow, their children might still remember the way home. The mystery of the Sodder children endures, not because the evidence proves they escaped the fire, but because, on Christmas morning in 1945, the evidence needed to learn the truth was already being lost.